Okay, if I could have everybody's attention, and we can go ahead and begin with our next part of our honoring here. So our honoring began with the publication of Sister Prudence's most recent book, The Concept of Woman, and with the imminent publication of a Festshrift of essays in her honor. And it has grown to a much larger audience as we invited many of you who have known her in various capacities. So I would first like to thank Father Chuchi for his hospitality in providing most precious blood to us, for us. And then I would also like to thank Endow, who have sponsored this and have provided for the sisters' travel and for meals. So thank you to both of you very much. On the back table is a discount sheet for the Festshrift, and I believe also maybe something for the book as well. We also have some pictures of a beautiful icon of the Virgin Mary. There's a few of those left if you would like to take one of those home with you as well. So what we're going to do is we have four speakers. They'll talk for about 5 to 10 minutes each. I'll introduce them. Then Sister Prudence will talk for a little bit, and then we'll open it up to question and answer and a little bit of discussion. Our first speaker is Father Matt Book. He's going to talk to us about Sister Prudence's contributions to priestly formation at the seminary. Father Book was ordained in 2010. He's currently pastor of Light of the World Parish, and he will take over as vicar of clergy on the 1st of July. So without more ado, Father Book.
Dr. McLaughlin, thank you very much. Sister Prudence, what a joy to be back in front of you, and hopefully my comments here can do justice to the huge impact you've had on so many of us in both Redemptoris Mater and St. John Vianney Seminary. My first thought as I was invited to speak about this was really one of our first encounters, which was in 2003. So I came to seminary in 2003, and so in Mass at the homily you heard maybe a seminarian from the apostolic era, the very beginning, the founding of the seminary, and I'm more sub-apostolic, so like that a few years later coming into seminary. And in 2003, I was there as an SY, and we had Parents' Weekend, and so it was a chance to show parents around. And I was very new to the seminary and who does what, and so Sister Prudence was in the sacristy of our seminary chapel, kind of for the tour that all the guys were taking their parents on. And so I remember I came in there with my folks, and I introduced Sister Mary Prudence. And Sister Prudence, she helps in the sacristy, and she teaches us how to prepare for Mass. and Sister Prudence, very kindly, with kind of a look of amusement on her face, just said, "Oh, I do a few other things as well." Little did I know. But I start with that sacristy episode because I think that points to, if we think about maybe the impact you've had, we can think about the areas of effort in the seminary, the different pillars, and that spiritual one. And so in a beautiful way to kind of really meet you the first time via sacristy, via preparing for Mass, the things of the Lord, is, I think, so super fitting. And your life as a consecrated sister was already a great contribution to the seminary. Just that love of the Lord and that total commitment to Him was something that was already a witness and a message to all of us who are pondering and discerning priesthood and living a life dedicated to the Lord. And to have you doing that in our midst with your sisters was already a very beautiful contribution. And then I think about going to do holy hours with the sisters later on. Finally, a deacon and doing exposition, and to be with the sisters, to be with you, and the prayers and the chanting. And so of course, we honor you so much for your intellectual accomplishments and that, but those are all born out of first a love of God and a love of His works, especially the human person. So the spiritual pillar was something that you definitely helped us in. But then we do move on to that whole realm of our intellectual life, our pursuit of the truth. And I start actually with a quote from one of our works that we read in a class of yours. So this passage goes thus: "In like manner, the mists of sadness dissolved. I came to myself and recovered my judgment, so that I knew my physician's face. Wherefore, casting mine eyes upon her somewhat steadfastly, I beheld my nurse Philosophy, in whose house I remained from my youth." Of course, that's Boethius, the consolation of philosophy. Actually, 15th anniversary of his death just last year. And I think about that because I think of you in the seminary as kind of, in a certain way, Our Lady Philosophy, you know, and as you ushered us into this beautiful pursuit of truth, you know, and as Boethius was recalled to the philosophical life and the philosophical mindset, in many ways we were introduced to that by you, kind of Our Lady Philosophy at the seminary. And I think your own love of wisdom, your thrill for learning, for philosophizing, for entering those depths itself, just your love for it was already a beautiful counter-proposal to the rudimentary, the reactionary pragmatism that we as kind of Americans and just simply live in. And so we as seminarians have grown up in those waters, and to then come to people who have a desire for what is the deep truth. You know, what are the fundamental realities and what is the truth about a human person? And to see your love for that and your desire to share that was just a beautiful gift already. And then also, I think as Our Lady Philosophy, you really believed in our capacity to become philosophers and develop a capacity for sustained and for careful thought. And so I want to highlight two of your invaluable tools as Our Lady Philosophy. And so the first would be the dispense, the overhead projector notes that you shared with us. And as I talked with my brothers and asked for kind of their input, and so I shared not only my own recollections, but theirs as well, how beautiful just that divulging of truth, you know, bit by bit, and just your insistence on us to stay right with the argument, right with the distinction, right with the thought, and having us just take our own notes and to digest this and to jot down our own thoughts about things. And really, I've only heard of one exception where you actually turned over your dispense, and it was when a seminarian broke his wrist when he was out skiing. And so to quote a seminarian, well, now a priest, "Sister was a living embodiment of her vow of mercy when she decided to print off her class notes for this seminarian and in turn the rest of his classmates." But that turning over of something so dear to you in these thoughts. And then maybe another tool as Our Lady Philosophy were your high precision exams. Because not enough just wonder and pondering, but also rigor. And so I recall on the exams that you'd recommend how many minutes to take for each question so that you would not get bogged down and run out of time and not be able to answer the question. So precise allotment of time for each question, as well as the questions were given, you know, very precise value to the decimal point of how many points they'd be worth. You know, and so, as one former seminarian mentioned, he said, taking your test was like climbing a 100-point mountain with the clock always ticking in the background. But yet here again, Sister Prudence, you lived up to being a sister of mercy in your grading, and which was a good thing, and just to know that how much, you know, love needs to accompany wisdom. And it was all to good effect, because as one other noted, we learned the discipline of thinking clearly and quickly as philosophers. And so you gave us not only content, but a way of thinking, a capacity to think, and to have exercised and grown that strength to be able to think well. And that was a great gift. part of your philosophical teaching for us was also about, of course, the human person. We heard about that in the homily, but overall, I think just a deep care for the nature of the human person and the importance of proper anthropology. And I think about from Karl Wojtyła's, of course, the acting person, alluded to before. But I also think very fondly of writing our paper in medieval philosophy about one of the passions, and just to go deep into how does kind of my heart, my soul work, my humanity, to delve into that and not to be afraid of that and actually to find freedom in my understanding of it. And so that was a real gift in this kind of human pillar. But also I would just note simply your, we could say, feminine genius, of being a woman who's strong yet gracious, and just your humanity itself was a gift, and I think it was a very valuable gift for seminarians to have you and have other women there as well. And also, I think of some more fun things. I remember a few seminarians coming back from the convent with a tattered cuff to their pants leg or a hole in their pants, and that was from Savio, this vicious little dog. But how you try to teach the seminarians, like, you must be firm, and do not be afraid. This dog can smell fear, and so in a very tangible way, you helped us engage our humanity before Savio would be sicked on us. And also a sense of fun. I remember you're walking about the seminary grounds with your wide-brimmed, straw hat, your sun hat, and just out and just, again, that embracing your humanity, being out in the world. And I also think of Wash Park, the croquet game that the sisters put on as well. And so a spirit of competition was there as well. And so your full humanity was a gift to us as we were growing in our own humanity. And then lastly, when I was asked to speak, the interesting thing was just a few months prior, I gave a parishioner a copy of my paper on the passion of anger, on that irascible passion. I felt he could use that, and as I gave it to him, I gave it a read through as well, which is a very good review for myself. And but how many years later? Some 20 years later, the teachings of that, the teachings around our human nature and philosophically, are things that I can put my finger on, I can share with others. It forms a framework of understanding that I can use to share with others, and even giving that paper to this parishioner. And so that pastoral pillar as well, how we care for people as priests has been formed thanks to your contributions as well, and helping us be in touch, and also having that philosophical mind, we can bring enlightenment and understanding to others as well. So our four key pillars of the seminary: formation, spiritual, intellectual, human, and pastoral. We give thanks for your great contributions and all of that, and it really is a moment in the sharing of great gratitude, admiration, and affection. Thank you very much.
Thank you, Father Book. Sister, you may enjoy, we still have that passions paper assignment. It's never left, okay? We still give that every year to the seminarians. Thank you, Father Book. I would now like to introduce Terry Balakovic, who is the first executive director of Endow, and who will talk about Sister's work with Endow.
Thank you.
You're welcome.
Thank you, Tom. Okay. Can you hear me?
Yes.
You prefer it to come down a little bit?
Yeah, a little bit. Maybe I'll just take it off. Father Dan. Okay. Can you hear me now? Okay. Okay. Well, first of all, I also want to thank everybody. It's such a great little gathering here, and so fun to see old friends. So thank you so much for inviting me. I want to give a special thanks to Bishop Rodriguez, because he's an old friend, and he said a beautiful Mass, and he was with Endow from the very beginning. So Anyway, I met Sister Prudence in the winter of 2003. I was one of 3 women, Marilyn Coors, Betsy Considine, and myself, who were trying to get a new apostolate off the ground. We had named it ENDOW, an acronym for the Educating on the Nature and Dignity of Women. The key word here was educating. We saw it as one answer to Pope John Paul II's call for a new feminism. We wanted to teach other women what we were learning. The whole idea of ENDOW was based on the Holy Father's writings and his teachings on the dignity and vocation of women, a message that the 3 of us had fallen in love with, and we were sure that other women would feel the same way. Our wounded culture definitely needed to hear his words, so it became our mission to speak directly to this need. At that time, I took on the role of president, and it was my job to learn as much as I could on the subject of Catholic feminism. I read books, articles, and speeches given by such people as Helen Albright, Janet Smith, and Mary Ann Glendon. As I dug deeper, people started recommending that I reach out to Sister Prudence Allen because she was the expert. I heard her name over and over, and one of the other founders was particularly keen on her. At the time, I had no idea that Sister Prudence and I had offices on the same campus at the Archdiocese of Denver. In fact, our offices were about 100 yards apart from one another. Ultimately, I approached her and shared with her our dreams for this apostolate. I remember distinctly asking her if she would teach us everything she knew, which is a little bit of an absurd thing to say. Unfortunately, she turned me down because in her words, I left that part of my life behind. She explained that she was in Denver to help start the new seminary. I was heartbroken but persistent. Later in the spring of 2003, Sister Prudence informed me that she had permission to teach our group one class over the summer. That class was on the topic of Pope John Paul II's apostolic letter, Mulieris Dignitatem, on the dignity and vocation of women. With very little advertising, 40 people, men and women, showed up for that first class, and the attendance never really waned. So I would say that was the beginning of ENDOW. Sister Prudence didn't know it then, but she was in the process of starting a new apostolate. People would come and go, but the class was always full. One class turned into 5 or 6 years of classes based on various papal letters written by John Paul II, Paul VI, and Benedict XVI. Sister also taught classes on the lives of different saints and on several documents from the Second Vatican Council. Sister Prudence's way of teaching was entirely unique. In her class, the participants read the material out loud, and she would stop the reading periodically to explain the meaning of the text. In this way, the class was all learning together at the same pace. Most importantly, there was no homework. That ended up being a big selling point of the program, because most women and men don't have time for hours of homework. Anyway, one thing led to another, and from those classes came the program side of ENDOW. ENDOW employees began to write study guides based on how Sister Prudence led the class. In other words, we at ENDOW developed study materials for outside facilitators and participants to use. The idea was that participants read from the original documents, and then ENDOW would supply commentary to help them understand the subject. Our commentary was in the form of a study guide. From the very beginning, the program took off, and we were getting requests from all over the country and outside the United States to produce more study materials. ENDOW grew faster than we could have ever imagined, and we were all thrilled to death. The energy in the office was electric, and we would share every success with Sister Prudence. It seemed that she was always more thrilled than we were. As a side note, it has always amazed me that Sister Prudence was obedient to her superiors in that she willingly gave up her life's work that she loved, to come to Denver. She had taught at Concordia University for 30 years. For all she knew, that part of her life was over. And then, with ENDOW, God brought it all back to her in a whole new way. One interesting thing about Endow, I'm sorry, I'm going to have to get a drink of water.
Too many things in your hand.
Oh, thank you. Thank you. Thanks, Susan. One interesting thing about Endow is that it has its own charism. There is something about it that attracts people, as evidenced by all of the Endow people here in this audience. It is a teaching apostolate, so inherently you want it to be good, so that you can share it with others. Endow would not be what it is today without the help of many people. Every person in this room that is affiliated with Endow played an integral part in the success of the program. It always amazed me that God would send the people we needed. I have given you this background because I want to familiarize you with the early dynamic of the apostolate. But what I haven't yet spoken about is the thousands of women whose lives were changed and have been changed in the 22 years since the program began. I just like to read that, 22 years. For example, women who are cohabitating in cohabitating situations got married. Marriages were saved, marriages were finally annulled, using contraception was reconsidered, children were born, and children were baptized. There were also religious vocations, including my own daughter, who joined the Religious Sisters of Mercy. Because of Endow, thousands and thousands of women are now able to catechize their children, perhaps for the first time. I even remember there was one woman who stepped down from her role as president of the local Planned Parenthood chapter. The stories are endless. It so happens that when women embrace the truth of who they are in God's eyes, they are willing to drop everything to follow Him. In closing, I just want to share a thought that came to me while I was writing this presentation. When John Paul II wrote Mulieris Dignitatem back in 1987, I believe that he was only reacting to the radical feminism of the 60s and 70s. I believe that he was also looking into the future, that being the gender ideology that we are all living through today. Sister Prudence addresses this specifically in her book, and she's written a paper. It's in the back of the room. And I know that Susan Selner-Wright has a presentation on this subject. I think that is why it was so important to John Paul II that men and women know who they are, made in the image and likeness of God. But I wonder how far into the future did the late Pope see? Did he see that young women would be willing to cut off parts of their bodies so as to become men, and vice versa? Young men doing the same thing in order to win sports trophies. I do not know the answer, but it's an interesting thought. And if that's totally heretical, I don't know the answer. In any case, I would like to bring this presentation back to Sister Prudence and the grace she brought and is still bringing to so many people. To quote one of my former co-workers in reference to Sister Prudence, "You always love the one who leads you to God."
Thank you very much. Thank you very much, Terry. I enjoyed hearing about that a lot. I was sort of just watching Sister for some of this, so a lot of that was new to me. I'd like to introduce our next speaker, Sister Mary Veronica Sibeli. Sister is at the John Paul II Institute at the University of St. Thomas in Houston. She has done the Herculean effort of editing the Festshrift, and it gives herding cats a whole new meaning when you're trying to deal with a lot of scholars and writing papers. And I would very much love to hear the story on that and all about your work on with the sister on the Festshrift.
Would you like it lower?
I would.
I would.
Yeah.
I'm a shorty.
Does that suit you?
Well, the story begins way back because, there are some sisters in our community that I've actually never lived with in the same house. But with Sister Mary Prudence, it's quite the opposite. We kept being put together in different places over and over again. So the first time I actually was, when she very first entered, I was spending the summer at our mother house, and she was there for the summer. She was still teaching in Montreal, but she was there for the summer, and so I got to know her. But the more significant summer was 1984, when I was in the last summer before my last year in law school, and she came to finish the first volume. She was working for the summer. In our dining room, she had 2 manual typewriters set up next to each other. One was for the text, the other was for the footnotes. I think that the year after that, she took a class on how to use the desktop computer, and then she became one of the pioneers of using the computer and using email in our community. But she had the 2 manual typewriters, and she was finishing the first volume of the 3 volumes of the Concept of Woman. And then I was together with her again in Washington, D.C. I was working in the office of the CMSWR. I went there for the first 3 years of its existence and set up that office and worked in it. And for the third of those 3 years, Sister came for a whole sabbatical year. And we rented a little house some friends of hers had, and we had our first convent in Washington. That was the beginning of our foundation in Washington. And I watched her going to the Library of Congress, going to the Folger Library, and doing all this research. And actually, I skipped over one. The next time was actually, that was the third time we were together. The second time we were together was in Connecticut. After that, I was working in law, and she came. She had a sabbatical year, and she was starting the research for the second volume. And she hired me as her research assistant. And I would go down to the Beinecke Library at Yale University and dig through all these medieval and Renaissance sources. And either, you couldn't take those out, so I would try to photocopy them or however I could do it. And so that went on for that year. That was 84 to 85. And then it was in Washington, D.C. That was in 1992 that she came, first for a month, and then she came from 93 to 94 to have her sabbatical year. So as I said, she was still working on the second volume, which, as you know, is quite large. And the research was voluminous, and she was going to the Library of Congress where she had a desk and working there, and she would also work at the convent in the evenings, and she was going to the Folger Library. And I would hear about the research she was doing. I remember you talking all the time about how excited you were about Christine de Pizan because you were just reading her work at that time. And then the next time we were together, I went up to Montreal. It was the end of that year in Washington. And she was going back to Montreal, but I was assigned to go to Montreal and to actually start a degree myself in philosophy. So I had taken a few courses at Catholic U, and while I was in Washington, and she would do this wonderful thing without my even realizing it. At breakfast, when she knew I had an exam, she would say, well, so what's going to be on your exam? And I would say, well, we're going to be talking about this period, and who are the philosophers? And I would tell her which philosophers. And what kind of things are you learning about those philosophers? And I would start explaining it. And then at the end of it all, she would say, I think you're ready. You're okay. You know what you're talking about. I had no idea. She was kind of giving me a pre-exam, but it was a really great help to preparing for the exam. Anyway, then we went up to Montreal, and I started my master's degree at Concordia. I took her seminar on the acting person, among other things, and I did my master's work for 2 years there in Montreal. And then I went, the next time was here in Denver. I went to Rome and finished my license and doctorate in Rome. And then from Rome, I was assigned to Denver, where Sister had come. And once again, she was just starting her research for the 3rd volume. And I again remember you talking about your real distress at some of the things you had to read, the things about gender ideology and so forth, and Michel Foucault and some of these philosophers. So I felt as if I was sort of getting to know her Canadian world of philosophy, the Washington, D.C. world of philosophy, her world of scholars here in Denver, and then hearing the process of the 1st volume, the 2nd volume, the 3rd volume. So when the 3rd volume was published, which was at the very end of 2016, I thought to myself, we really ought to do a Festshrift for her, And so it's been a long time coming, but I did eventually write a proposal to our Superior General and Council at the time. They gave permission to do it. We started inviting people that Sister had worked with or had known with or studied with. And unfortunately, a lot of people who had really helped her had already passed away, like Father T. Kipp, Father Francis Martin, Father Lawrence Dewan, So we would have loved to invite them to participate and contribute papers, but they're watching from above. But anyway, so now the book should be published in May. We had hoped it would be January, then it got delayed to March, and now they're saying the end of May. So that's how it all came about. So it's really from my own experience in many times and many places with Sister Prudence that this impetus came about. And it's been a joy to work on it. It's been a joy to reconnect with a lot of the scholars that I met when I first was living with Sister in different places. And it'll be a real joy. It's a joy to have everyone here. We had a conference when we first started this process, a conference where people had the opportunity to present their papers in Michigan. And that was more than I could have ever hoped. I was hoping it would just be a joyful event and an event of friendship, but that's really what it was. It was a joy of communal, intellectual stimulation and joy in the intellectual life. And it was an absolutely marvelous conference. So this is another marvelous gathering. And I'm so grateful, actually, to Tom and Susan and everyone on this end, Father Chuchi, who have made it possible for us to all gather here together. I also want to mention what Tom McLaughlin already mentioned. In the back table, there's a flyer about the book. It's called Gender Complementarity and Christian Personalism, The Philosophy of Sister Prudence Allen, RSM. And it's the page from the catalog that describes the book. And there's also an information sheet on how you can, for those who were here, you can order the book with a 30% discount, and you order it online. When you get to the payment page, there's a box where you can enter the discount code, which is on the sheet. It's CAVE, C-A-V-E. So they must have been thinking of Plato's cave, I don't know. But anyway, so please take those flyers. And the flyer, hopefully, we would have hoped to have the book here that possibly Sister could sign But if you want to get her signature, you could get it there's a border on the right that didn't have any print in it, so you could have her signature there. Thank you very much.
Thank you, Sister Sibeli. Thank you very much. I would like to introduce our fourth speaker, Dr. Mary Catherine Summers, whom I know from her years as director of the Center of Thomistic Studies in the University of St. Thomas in Houston, and then most recently as president of the American Catholic Philosophical Association, a term which she just concluded in November. And then finally, I had the joy of watching you present Sister Prudence with the Aquinas Medal in 2021. So without further ado, Dr. Catherine Summers.
Well, talking about Sister Prudence's contributions to philosophy is not a small task, so I've tried to sandwich it in somehow within this time. What has Sister done for philosophy? Well, the first thing, she's given us a new canon, all right? With the 3-volume work on the concept of woman, she's really transformed this discipline that she helped initiate all those years ago in Montreal. And the volume has been described in many ways. I mean, John Cavadini talked about it being a brilliant piece of scholarship, shorn of stereotypes. Think of that, being able to talk about men and women in such a way that the stereotypes just fizzle out and head for the perimeter. So we have a new canon full of many voices that were never heard, or at least were never heard in discussions of the nature of man and woman and important philosophical discussions. In that Sister Veronica was talking about Sister Prudence's, introduction to Christine de Pizan. Well, I'm a medievalist. I'd read Christine de Pizan, but the idea that she would be a philosophical voice, a voice for determining, basic principles, was not something that, was commonly discussed. And she did this with a method, and her method is really astonishing. First, as I said, she examined material which had either been unknown or ignored in philosophical discussions. I mean, Roswitha of Gandersheim? Okay, really. Not before then, even though I did know Christine de Pizan or Laura Serreta. Secondly, she managed to forge a single object of study from this staggering amount of material. And Beatrice Zedler, there's the story, mentioned that it wasn't because she sort of forced them into some kind of mold, to fit her little boxes or whatever. But she acknowledges all the nuances and even the seeming, inconsistencies in these works. And this job of creating a single object of study was aided, as Peter Casarella has said, by the use of taxonomies and charts that would make a woman, I'm having some eye trouble here, that would make engineers envious and philosophers ashamed at her clarity. This is perfectly true. And also she examined the concept of woman not in isolation, but together with man, and this representing the whole of humanity, the whole of the imaging of God, and also the idea that this idea of man and woman should be related to each other analogously. And fourth, she had these dialogues. She saw the importance of male and female dialogues. And of course, she talked about the real ones, the imagined ones that we find in literature, and even ones we probably never would have thought of looking at, like the interrogations of Joan of Arc or Marjorie Kemp. A dissolution of the understanding of man and woman, but nevertheless a dialogue that one couldn't ignore. And finally, she used the history of philosophy as a method of doing philosophy, one I highly approve of, having gone to the Pontifical Institute of Medieval Studies. So, instead of, picking up questions or picking up authors at different places, she just unfolded the whole history of philosophy in terms of this, growing understanding and sometimes misunderstanding of male and female. And I know one reviewer once remarked that you could really use these books as an encyclopedia, but this would be a mistake, walking in, opening it up, picking out some aspect of the problem or some place in which the problem developed. It really should be approached as telling a great and, until now, untold story. Now, this is the kind of narrative quality that her work has. Now, because of her work, she has become what they would call in the Middle Ages an auctor. In other words, a person whose writing had auctoritas, could be cited with authority, all right? And there has been some recognition of her place as an authority. Tom mentioned her receiving the 2021 Aquinas Medal from the American Catholic Philosophical Association. And interestingly enough, from the moment that she was introduced as the recipient of the Aquinas Medal, the entire room broke into applause, standing ovation. Now, this is not unknown at the ACPA, but it is not common. And I think it was not only recognizing, the extent and importance of her work, but also the fact that, why didn't I know this? I mean, people told me our younger scholars, were all on their phones, looking this up. Why didn't I know this? So it was both for her astonishing accomplishments, but also for the fact that they hadn't quite picked up on this yet. So this was a moment of learning. And this also happened after I was talking about the Festshrift conference and about the Aquinas Medal with an old student of mine who was for many years the president of DePaul University. And then at that time I was talking to him was the president of the Association of Catholic Colleges and Universities. And he had the same look on his face. He was just like, how did I miss this? Why didn't I know? And so he was determined that Sister Prudence would be presented to the council of the ACCU as a possible recipient of the Monica Helwig Award for outstanding contributions to Catholic intellectual life. And it happened almost immediately. And again, he had this stunned reaction. He said, think of what it would mean if we had missed the opportunity to honor her. I mean, it would be an embarrassment. It was something we just couldn't live down. So that was very good, I thought. A learning moment. Now, last year, as Tom mentioned, I was president of the ACPA, and we decided to take as our theme for the meeting, male and female, he created them. And we always have a little, auctoritas on the program, at the beginning of the program. And this one was taken from volume 2 of Sister Prudence's work. When I use the term gender, I'm using it to include also the biological foundations of a woman's or a man's identity. This usage harkens back to the original root meaning of gender, which comes from gens and applies to generate and engender. So this was our sort of motto for the meeting last year. And I sort of affirmed this, I guess, in my presidential address, which was towards a Thomistic definition of gender. And I went, going through arguments for not separating sex and gender. There are all kinds of arguments, and given out by very, very fine authors, it just leads to trouble. It might be clarifying in some ways, but it's just dangerous. Just don't do it. So after reciting these arguments, I said I was going to put aside these reasonable and prudential arguments and start instead with an argument from authority. Which, for a philosopher, this is the lowest argument that there can be. But this is what happens when you become an authority. All of a sudden, we can put aside those concerns. And I said, Prudence Allen, in her second volume of her trilogy, The Concept of Woman, changes the terminology of her diagnostic categories from sex, that is like sex unity, gender complementarity, for example. And she explained these basic premises remain the same, with detailed analyses that fall within each changes the terminology, changes as human beings become more conscious of who they are in their engendered specificity. They realize that they are more than just an engendered body, male or female. So, she goes out on a limb here and says, yes, we have to use the term gender to explain the sort of dynamic relationship between who we are as male and female and all of the contexts in which we develop ourselves as male and female, and particularly, how our reason and free will interact with this context and our, in our encounters with male and female and with our reading about male and female, etc. So we have to use the term gender in order to say that gender is something which grows. Okay, it isn't just a given, but it's something that grows and develops. Now, in the ACPA, we have a theme, and we invite papers that are blind reviewed for the sessions, and so you can a number of the papers will always be on the theme of the session, but also we have groups and different institutes that give papers every year, and they can do anything they want. They organize themselves. They ask for inclusion in the program. We include them in the program. And so I went through the program from last year, and there were like 40-some papers and posters that all focused on this theme, which we had brought to the fore and learned so much about from Sister Prudence's work. And some of our plenary sessions were given by people who, in fact, had been at the Festshrift conference, like, Sarah Borden-Sharkey and Deb Savage, for example. So this is fruitfulness, all right? That you go from a book to its readers, to its astonished readers, to then it moving out to in very many different areas and bearing fruit in that way. And these are some of the papers and some of the, I sort of headlined them under, sort of headlines that we could organize, were organizational. The body and gender, okay? So Sarah Borden gave a paper on a map for traveling through gender conversations as a hylomorphist, okay? We had, what can Thomas contribute to the gender ontology debates within the philosophy of biology, okay? Number of papers on philosophy of biology and the question of gender in them. A philosophical reflection on John Paul II's theological sense of body persons, right? The problem of the relationship between soul and body. What about the generative powers? How are they alike and unlike other kinds of human powers? A personalistic biological understanding of sexual identity, okay? Recognition and identity. We had a number of papers on the question of identity. Masculinity and femininity considered as symbolic realities. Or, nice practical paper from Francis Feingold, like he always is, seminary teacher at Kenrick Glennon. Is sex change metaphysically possible? Okay, let's not argue about other. Let's get down to the res on this one. And so then we had some from culture and gender. David Schindler's Culture and the Sexual Difference. Female he created, feminine image we created. Culture and the Making of Man and Woman. There also were a number of papers that examined Trinitarian analogies with male, female. Mark Spencer did one on a Trinitarian metaphysics of man, woman, and priesthood. So these are, again, you expect that there are going to be some papers like that that kind of get into even as a philosophy conference, to get into theological understandings of gender. Creation, divine and human. This was a big one. We had lots of papers on that. Deborah Savage, who was at the Festshrift conference and contributed a paper, went back to creation, Genesis 1-2, and just powered on with the Hebrew, ramifications of the language that we used, and made quite a case for equal status for men and women in the creation narrative, among other things. So again, how did they create them? Stephen Baldner from Antigonish gave this paper. Okay, male and female, he created them, but how does this happen? Another one on the 4 causes of sex, or Sister Frances Iles, one of our graduates, the creation of woman, the feminine genius of being a helpmate. And we had some on language. Thomas Bogardus, who writes a lot on gender, had one called Peace Be Upon They and Them. All right. So then on the ethics of pronouns, and another paper on gendered pronouns, gendered nouns and pronouns, and the implications of this. We had some on sources from the ancient world, Homeric paradigms in Plato's lovecraft and statecraft, Sex and the City, on Aristotelian feminine virtues, or the one who won the Young Scholars Award this year, Slavish by Nature, Aristotle on slaves, women, and barbarians. So that was an interesting paper. Lots, as you would imagine, on Edith Stein and various aspects of her teaching on gender. And then we had some Lonergan papers as well. So some of them were organized around authors, but most organized around topics or something. So this is a sort of list of fruits, okay, from starting out with teaching and writing and research, and then all of a sudden, even before you know it, we're not just talking about a few people who are reading these books, but we're talking about their influence and the way that they're spreading interest in these topics and deep reflection on these topics. So philosophy has gotten all of this from Sister Prudence. New people to examine, a method which is just, well, I think it's revolutionary at any rate. That's, because of the difficulty of managing all of that, and also of not just, creating this little moment in philosophy of history, in this little moment, but in fact bringing this all together in a way which, philosophy is always looking for unity, despite the fact that sometimes it rejects it and, finds it too, concrete, to this, to that. But this is a tribute to philosophy as being able to produce unity out of masses of material, out of all these different eras and all these different voices, and yet giving us something in the end which is whole and complete. And when I heard that Sister had done the synthesis, I couldn't believe it. Make it in some ways more approachable and easy for the young to understand. We'll just leave that to the young. The rest of us will read all 3 books, right? All of them, exactly. So the discipline of philosophy, and particularly Catholic philosophy, owes so much to Sister Prudence, a debt that can't be paid. So, thank you.
Thank you, Dr. Summers. Sister Prudence, would you like to make some remarks, please?
H has its good things and its bad things. So this, okay, thanks very much. Thank you so much. I have to say right away, thank you very much for this important time together of discussing some of the themes that came out. More specifically, I will mention everyone who is responsible for organizing this book launch. I'm very grateful. First of all, it's a delight to return to Denver after so many years away. My heart is always close to Denver and the wonderful years I was here in the seminary. It was a great privilege in my life to have served here as both a teacher and administrator. Especially what I loved was to learn about each man who had been formed here, went forward to become a priest, an administrator, or to serve in a diocese of Denver or another diocese in many other different ways. It's incredible, and to see how many came from our classes and now you're all over the place. It's really incredible. I'm very grateful to just have had a small part in that growth of vocations here at St. John Vianney. It's also a joy for me to be able to return here once again for this book launch. I'm very grateful to Sister Mary Veronica, who organized responses to my work in such a rich interdisciplinary response that will bear fruit for years to come. I thank you all for everything that you have done. There's much more I could say, but I thought, if we want to take just a couple of minutes, if people want to ask questions of me about how things came about, I would be happy to share that. So, or anything you want to say.
How did it feel for you when you first read John Paul II's Mulieris Dignitatem, because it was new, and as I grew up, it was something that people referenced, and it had already existed before I was born. But how did it feel to read it when it first came out?
I was thrilled, because it was the first just sort of short-term document, public document that really is the way I was thinking about things, but he took it deeper and broader. So I was just thrilled that, the Pope was doing this, so I could feel that there's no problem with it. And as you know from other things, people were saying in the beginning, this is not philosophy. What you're doing is anthropology. You're doing everything else. So I had to fight for the right to keep doing it. Until now, it's accepted. It's the method that's philosophical. The topic can be anything, but it's the method of approaching it is philosophical. And it was the method that many people, like John Paul II, used, tremendously to talk about man and woman. He used it all the time, his method. So, just other comments or questions?
Could you elaborate a bit on kind of your first attempts at this method, or kind of how that arose, or the insights that really showed you this method?
Well, when I always was appalled at what was going on in philosophy about the concept of person from the very beginning. And I think I was a math major before I turned to philosophy, so I loved something that's systematic, and I was looking for a systematic way of approaching the human person, and within that, the concept of woman and the concept of man. And it was hard to find one in the beginning, but little by little, I began to see how it could be done that way. And the other thing is, when I first published a paper, it got snapped up right away, as Sister Mary Veronica said, by the whoever it was, took it, because no one had ever written about it philosophically. And so that happened maybe for 3 years. Every time I submitted something, it was taken right away. And I was just a young professor of philosophy, and that doesn't usually happen. Usually you have to resubmit, and they suggest change this. But because it was a new area, to think about talking about man and woman using a philosophical method that was systematic all the way through is what made it work, is the only thing I can say. And I was in Canada, as Sister mentioned, so I was fortunate to get funding from the Canadian, it's Council of Research, basically. It's a little long name, but and so I could get funding from them that I could both hire research assistants and also, go travel places to look at libraries to see what I would find there. And I found, surprisingly, that in early times, like 1400s, let's say, there were people already then trying to write that way. So there are others. So then that encouraged me to say we could do it again, do it better. But it had been tried before, but then it got overwhelmed by other philosophical schools or the changing of decisions about what was going to be acceptable. And so then, when I started again with these 2 typewriters, mechanical ones, and just getting going, I could get the Social Science and Humanities Research Council of Canada funded me. They didn't at first, but then when they saw what I was writing, they did, because they realized this was different. Nobody had done it this way. And so that's how I was able to get started. And then continuing on sabbaticals, I could get more funding. And, once you publish, people will accept you, and you can submit to them what you've published. And I had help from research assistants who were very good. They would find things in libraries. They would go with me to libraries, and they would find documents, and then I could analyze them. So, I'm 84, so I started doing this in my 30s. So you can see if you do it regularly, it's the same thing. I made a decision, this area I'm going to work on because nobody's written on it this way. And so that's how it really came to be, that I could continue. And I enjoyed it, and my students enjoyed it, and I would try things out. I would always submit it first to a good author to see what they thought before I would submit it for publication. And I often picked someone that I was arguing against, just to ask them, would they look at it and tell me what they think is wrong with it? But they often their mind got changed, And so I realized then that I was onto something. And because no one had ever gone through history of philosophy looking systematically at the philosophy of the concept of woman in relation to man, it was like a new field opening out there. And so I was able always to get them published. Anyone would publish them because they never published anything like that before. And so that's how it happened. And so I was so grateful for that.
Bishop Rodriguez, Brother Priest, Sister Prudence, dear religious and brothers and sisters in Christ. Today is a joyful gathering. So yesterday we had Laetare Sunday. So we may just extend that a bit and take the liberty to call this Laetare Monday. Our readings invite us to remember the joy the Lord desires for us. I create Jerusalem to be a joy, its people to be a delight. A big part of our joyful gathering is a thanksgiving for the presence of Sister Prudence. And thanksgiving for the many ways she taught and collaborated and led the philosophy department at SJV and impacted the Archdiocese of Denver. At SJV in the labor of forming men to be holy priests. So thank you, sister. Today's first gospel verse seems to be a custom fit, a bit of a bridge between philosophy and theology. Seek good and not evil, that you may live. That's the first order of business and a basic principle of the moral life. And so our readings today from Isaiah, filled with hope, a new heavens and a new earth, they have led me to reflect to on this day the gifts that I received from my philosophy classes. It was a deep study, not in a new heavens and a new earth, but rather our understanding of how things are today, our current heavens and our current earth. And so I and so many of us were introduced to the history of philosophy, how we know who is man, who is woman. Probably my favorite was, what is it to be a person in act? That was given to us by St. John Paul II. It was the seminar class. It was the capstone class of being in philosophy. And Sister, you insisted on having it seminar style so that we would participate, which was just like pulling teeth out of us, you know. No, you have to read the readings and then reflect in front of everybody else what the readings are saying and present. And so many times you just had absolutely no idea what he was talking about. But it did, through your guidance, start to unfold and start to come together and to see the beauty of the person. And so we all receive this great gift as we move toward ordination, because the church speaks of the infinite value of the person, the end of the person, to be in heaven with God forever, but how to appreciate what is going on in the person and how it is they can act freely. It helped myself, and I dare say the others, so much in being ministers of Christ, to remind persons and of that dignity that they have. I was at the lunch table the other day with Dr. McLaughlin and theology professor and others, and there was one at the table who was not in the academics and asked, what's the difference between philosophy and theology? What's happening? And so we spent a good part of the lunchtime there just trying to, as they do in philosophy, make distinctions. And trying to reflect on it. For myself, I believe it is that we receive a sound philosophy in order to have a seed ground, if you will, a posture to receive divine revelation, to receive grace, to know who we are naturally in this current heavens, in this current earth, so that we might receive the healing and the proclamation of the good news and our Savior, Jesus Christ, that God desires for us. So in our seminary classes, philosophy classes, we contemplated deeply essence and existence, cause and effects, potency and act, and then move on to life of virtue and vice, happiness and friendship, love and responsibility. And it's just like a beautiful flower unfolding. And being a formator at the seminary, so often you watch I get to be with them as I watch them go through the same process of starting philosophy classes, and I don't know why we're learning this, type of thing, and then they move into an appreciation for the gift that's being given in order to receive a greater gift. Now we can better hear the prophet Isaiah. I create Jerusalem to be a joy and its people a delight, to know why we are made, to be fully human, to have friendship with and praise of God, to share friendship with one another. This brings us happiness and beatitude. Our gospel today reminds us that this is the second sign Jesus did in the healing of the Roman official's son. But John is so brilliant. He gives us these little clues and side notes along the way that this second sign happens to take place where the wedding feast of Cana took place. The first sign. And so I believe John is telling us, if you want to look, there's a connection between the first sign and the second sign. In the first sign, the wedding feast of Cana is a celebration of the wedding feast of the Lamb in its larger sense. Jesus marrying our humanity and transforming our natural selves, our water, into wine. And to partake of that wine is to bring joy. But we know that that wine then, at the Holy Mass, becomes His precious blood. And in that precious blood, we're washed of our sins. And we're healed. And so we witness, I believe, our healing today. It takes place in the same place as the first sign. We must be healed of our illness. The centurion came forth, or royal official came forth because his son was near death. Yes, indeed, all of us. That's the reality for all of us in this natural, current world. We're all in need of a Savior. And so our gathering today is one of praise and thanksgiving in witnessing Jesus' healing of the royal official. It's a sign of His future healing of all of us from death. Your son will live, He says. We will live. Our gathering today is one of praise and thanksgiving. In Psalm 30, that was proclaimed, I will praise you, Lord, for you've rescued me. So this rescuing goes with the wedding feast, with the wedding at Cana, the complementarity. Philosophy reveals to us fallen humankind in a fallen world, and we're able to study that with faith, hope, and love, but we're able to reflect on it as it is. In many ways beautiful, and in many ways broken and in need of a Savior. Psalm 30 goes on, you preserved me, Jesus, you have preserved us, from among those going down into the pit. And so we come to celebrate the Holy Mass, the height, the source and summit, wherein we witness and partake in Jesus' death and resurrection, knowing that we will live in Him. And so on this self-designated Laetare Monday, we gather in joy and friendship and thanksgiving for the wonderful plan of salvation afforded us in Christ. And today, in a special way, for the gift of Sister Prudence and the many ways in which she's contributed to the formation of priests at SJV, and gifted the world through her labors and her reflections on the nature of humankind, male and female. So thank you, sister. We gather together in praise and thanksgiving for this Holy Mass. Jesus, we trust in you. We receive with joy your assurance to us. Your Son will live. We will live. Praise be Jesus Christ.